Thank you. So while Daniel is trying to reconnect, I think now he's frozen. I then have the privilege to welcome all of you to this session on open source hardware development and the start of the FabLab Alliance. Daniel was supposed to say a few words also about this initiative, as he is the anchor of it so far. My name is Malte, and I am representing a maker here in Denmark. I am also joined in a minute by Daniel Veselek from FabLab Berlin, or as they are now called, Prototypes. So they're transforming their space as well. And the reason why we are inviting you all to a talk about forming a FabLab Alliance on open source hardware development is because we are also a part of a EU-funded project called OpenNext. Now in OpenNext, which started in 2019, we are together with 19 partners, both research institutes, makerspaces, and companies, trying to find new ways of enhancing or spreading the use of open source methods in hardware development. Now, this is not an easy task, as you all probably know. It comes with a lot of difficulties. But one of the things that we've been trying to find out is how can makerspaces in particular be sort of a bridging point between communities and makers and companies wishing to use open source as a way of doing product development, but also strengthening their business models around both innovation, but also, of course, the use of knowledge outside of their own companies. The OpenNext project now has 1 year left, and we are entering into a demonstrator phase where we will work together with 12 different companies on new ways where the makerspace can act sort of like a facilitator between the community and the company, and thereby both sort of using the strength of a makerspace in terms of the community and the facilities, but also trying to bridge sort of sometimes the language barriers and the understanding between the makers and the companies. Now, we don't have the final answers now. We've been trying out different ways of working with companies as makerspace over the past year, and have been doing it very differently. Where we in Copenhagen have a community of physical entrepreneurs and professionals. We see that, for example, with Prototypes in Berlin, they have a community mainly of sort of traditional makers working in their spare time and during the night. So we don't have the final answer now in terms of what role can a makerspace take in order to enhance and qualify open source hardware development, but we're trying out different things. And one of the reasons why we are now inviting all of you also to join sort of an alliance of makerspaces within open source hardware development is that we can see that the makerspace, the role of the makerspace in society are changing. And this is one of the ways that we can see that we can actually enhance the role of the makerspace while at the same time moving sort of open source hardware development into a more mainstream business mindset as well. I don't know if Daniel is finally back on track.
Now I can hear you properly, at least. Can you hear me?
Now we can hear you.
So it was the magic of changing browsers, basically.
Yeah, that's good. So I just had a brief introduction here, Daniel. Maybe you heard some of it, but you might also want to introduce yourself and maybe some of the thoughts that we've had around this alliance.
Yeah, the goal is to, as you explained already, to just meet with people that are interested in open source hardware and actually see what one can do from like a makerspace FabLab perspective in order to actually get this going in a way that it reaches more people. So like I don't know if you explained this a bit also, Malte, but like for us the question is kind of like still very niche, and I'm very happy that there's so many people attending the session now, but it's kind of the question, okay, like how can one create sustainable models in a way for companies or people or spaces to actually engage in open source hardware and do this in a proper way that yeah, like I don't know, like we were thinking like right to repair could be like a huge thing where through like political action actually the requirements change, and then suddenly a lot of things happen and a lot of needs exist in order to create things that are open. And that's basically the starting point to try to bring together people, and also like to hear from all of you basically what your experiences have been so far, what you're looking for, what you would need, what you what makes sense somehow, and collect these things in this open document that I shared in the beginning.
So first of all, I mean, we now have some experience in open source hardware development, both in OpenNext, but also within other projects that we've done with companies. And I see that we are now quite a few people in this online room. The question, of course, is also the other FabLabs represented here. Do you have experience in doing open source hardware projects? Can you see yourself also working with it in the future? Where do you see sort of this movement of open source hardware going in terms of also makerspaces and companies? So that's sort of the open questions that we also have for you guys.
Shall we just say names and then people say if they want to say something or not? Max, for example.
Oh,
yeah, here.
Sorry, I started.
No, let's start. That's great.
Hey, I think like the with the right of repair, things could start to move in an interesting direction, I guess, because then so yeah, the makerspaces themselves, they could probably become like hubs where people can go and use the existing instructions to repair their things in a more efficient way. And then also I think like makerspaces as such could then, if there would be if in the next years they develop the skills and show a proficiency in terms of documenting open source projects, that they could actually offer that skill as a service to companies who want to kind of then become so they would like to become compliant with the new right to repair rules or something. So I think that it's interesting that whenever something comes from Germany, then it usually involves a little bit in politics. So meaning that yeah, you know, if it's open source hardware, then let's push for the, you know, the rights to repair. Let's you know, shout out to the government that we need this and so on. So yeah, looking forward.
Anyone else? I see quite a few FabLabs.
Yeah, hello everybody.
Hello.
I'm really also looking forward to this initiative because as open source hardware developer ourselves here in Germany, we would like to have a better infrastructure or support, or let's say projects where we can deploy our products, or we can show maybe our way of making documentation or of making projects.
What projects are you doing yourself?
We are building open source machines for FabLabs. And we have been building a large scale 3D printer and laser cutter. And now we are building a small scale laser cutter, desktop laser cutter. But we are really, let's say, working very hard for the documentation and for the deployment of this machine as a product.
Great. Maybe you can also like share links and so on, like maybe even directly in the document. So it's good if we have a list of things that we can.
Can I share it in chat, or there's a document?
Yeah, you can also share it just in the chat, and we can input it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hello.
In the spirit of sharing, there's an interesting piece of hardware that we made here. We're calling it an Arris Development Kit. It has both a kit and a board. I'll share also the link for that. It's mostly a maker device that can be used for both STEM and for university students. Yeah, so this is coming from Nairobi, Kenya. This is Felicity Meta. And this board is based on STM32 F103C8 chip, designed here in Kenya by one of our designers. I'm going to share details shortly.
Thank you, Felicity. Interesting.
Hello. I think the DeanSpec initiative is a very important first step, but we have to move on. I think we still have the situation that there is OSHW in the United States, and they ignore all these European things. And if you look on the homepage of OSHW, you get the impression that there are a lot of open source hardware projects which are certified. But if you look into the details, they shouldn't name it certification. And also, I think we need to bring the DeanSpec to an international level by we have to bring it to the ISO level.
So what are key differences basically of the OSHW certification and the DeanSpec certification?
Okay, there is no DeanSpec certification because certification has a very special meaning. You cannot say you certify something, so the DeanSpec is official now in a very first version. But I think now we need some real life examples. And there was a very good workshop just before about documentation. And that's one of the main topics. So what I see is, I'm coming from software development, and open source software development has a very successful history. But if we want to get successful in open source hardware, we need professionalization. And I see only the only interesting open source hardware projects are mainly in electronics, like Arduino. And there are a lot of other open source hardware projects, like I'm coming from Austria, and we have some very interesting projects. One project in architecture, but there we are in the same situation as has been mentioned before in the documentation workshop, we are not sure how to make a sustainable business model. We are not sure how we and what we should publish, because otherwise we bring in a lot of resources and others are just using it. So I think that's enough for now.
Cool, thank you.
And some great points, Leopold. In OpenX, during the past year, we've had discussions around those topics as well. But also talking about sort of two things. So the licensing, which is not really a thing right now, and the other thing is liability in open source hardware. So who is liable when? And that's one of the questions that we've had around mobility. So people actually producing products with speed and other things that can be dangerous. So yeah, thanks for your points, Leopold. Yeah, I'll post a link to OpenNext that someone mentioned.
Yeah, maybe another question that came up a few times was like, maybe someone has experiences with that, but like the concern that there might be like patents and like IP existing that one doesn't even know about, and what could happen then? Like would they sue you? What would you need to do in advance in order to avoid that? Like yeah, so like maybe that's another point that came up a few times in these legal questions. Are there any other people who want to share a bit?
Yeah, I just had a kind of a comment. I mean, I just following on what Leopold said, it seems like a lot of these open source projects are the sort of things that might have originated out of a makerspace or a small company like some kind of Arduino board. I know I'm here in Illinois in central United States, and right now I'll go ahead and post a link here. But there's a lot of talk now about this right to repair. I heard you mention that earlier. Somebody was talking about that, but that seems to be something that people are concerned about, especially here in farm country. You know, the farmers are always complaining because if they need to get their tractor fixed, they have to go down to John Deere because their tractor's painted green and get a certified technician to work on it. And typically John Deere doesn't like to release their proprietary information. So it does seem interesting. There's, you know, an interesting balance between making available to repair shops information they need to repair and then balancing that against, you know, a company's right to profit on their property. But that does seem to be, you know, trying to get the bigger companies to open up at least part of their databases so that you can get more people to repair things as they break and otherwise keep them in service.
Yeah, we had some good examples also, like we were working with Sono Motors, like a company in Germany that's producing electric cars, and they are also looking at other ways of doing these repairs and maintenance things. So instead of having their own dedicated network, they're also looking how can one include like independent repair shops and what would they need in order to fulfill their services and so on. So I think it would be really great if there was more happening in this direction, that it's easier to repair things.
Well, is there more happening in Europe? Has there already been laws kind of legislating that? I mean, we're just kind of at the start of the process here in the United States, but perhaps in Europe, there's been more laws already passed that are beneficial to the small businessman or woman. Do you have any knowledge?
A small thing that I'm aware of in Thuringia, in a state here in Germany, where they have like a repair bonus for electrical devices. So if you get your electrical device repaired your toaster or something, like you get half of the money up to 100 euro. So there's like some incentive at least in order to, yeah, to repair instead of just throw away and buy new. But it's very much in the beginning. It's just starting. But maybe other people are aware of other things happening in the US or in Europe or elsewhere. Like I don't know if there's any like right to repair movement, like legislation things that anyone is aware of.
Yeah, there are. I'll see if I can't find the link. In fact, there's a workshop up in Chicago, I think in November. I'll find the link.
There is a program called the FixPerts. I think it's based out of the UK. It's by FixEd. I'll just put a link in the chat. It's basically a community of people like us coming together, and instead of going to a proprietary company, they just exchange the pieces between themselves. And people who do have the know-how and the parts, they just exchange those bits and help each other out. Which is pretty cool. I just put it in the chat.
Cool, thank you. There's also like some things where, but I'm not sure if there are like good databases for it and so on, but like often like small things break that are like easily 3D printable and so on. So I'm not aware of good repositories of this or something, but I think this could also be very helpful in general too. Because it's often like a huge effort to rebuild the single parts, but once they're there, it's very easy to print them. Sarah, what are your experiences from the City Lab as I see you here?
I'm not sure if my connection is good enough to talk, actually. Okay. Yeah, City Lab Berlin, that's the place where I'm working. There, we try to make open source hardware workshops with people that have never done anything with electronics before. And yeah, it's they always have very, very great ideas. And then we do design thinking and all kind of things to empower them to build their things. And then there's always a point where they can't go on because, for example, they need more hardware than an Arduino that is more powerful, or they need more programming skills. And so the ideas kind of die because they don't have budget for to realize their huge ideas. So that's the point where I want to start to do some research to develop new prototyping tools, because I think this is very important to empower people to make their ideas really happen. So this is my experience. I hope you could hear me.
Max, there's also like maybe you can share some experiences from like the prototype fund and the ideas to move on from the existing things.
Yeah, I can do this. Yeah, I'm Max from the Open Knowledge Foundation in Germany, and we have this this prototype fund for software projects, but it's focused on software projects. And now we are starting a small one focused on hardware. And yeah, I think it will also have a focus on this documentation stuff, because this is often a problem because there's no time for documentation. And so yeah, we will try to help to make the projects very well documented to make it possible to rebuild them. And yeah, but we are still in the very early stage, and yeah, I'm very curious which kind of projects will approach to our fund. I have a question to this round here. Is somebody, or was somebody part of this Mozilla Open Leaders program for hardware projects, because this is also an interesting network. And I know some of them, and they have a focus on science. So open source hardware for in the context of science. And I think this is also very interesting area, because in Germany you have this saying, public money for public good. So if the public sector spends money in science, then the instruments should be open source hardware, and this is like a very nice approach to foster open hardware. So yeah, I'm curious if somebody was part of Open Leaders program and who is maybe interested or like yeah, involved in the science sector.
I wasn't involved, but I just I looked at their blueprint basically, and I thought it's a nice starting point if one makes challenges of one's own or something. I think there's a lot of publicly available work done already, but maybe someone has some like first-hand experiences, not just looking at it. And or also like involvement in this like whole GOSH community, like, because I also think there's like a lot of things that, especially because like science devices often are like one-offs in larger scale. It's really possible to build things in a good way, and there's also these efforts by CERN and so on. And like,
one of the questions that we are also struggling a bit with, Daniel and I, and also the people from Bach, is how to turn this into a more mainstream philosophy than it is right now. And one of the ways that we've been trying to reach this is by also engaging sort of the more established companies in various fields. But it's extremely difficult to engage them without really knowing what the business perspective looks like. What is the revenue model, and how is it done practically in terms of inviting designers, for example, into the product development and then releasing the files, then who gets paid when and where. Yeah, so do you have any that on the top of your mind ideas on how to also make this into a more mainstream approach in terms of product development? Yeah, if any.
I think it's something about good practices. So and I'm not sure if it's good approach to start at like a regular businesses. So because you need to discuss a lot and yeah, show that it's maybe interesting for them. Maybe it's better to start with other communities who are open for this, and yeah, show how it could look like, and show what maybe come up, or what's possible. Maybe also if it comes to businesses. So yeah, I think it's about good practices, because this is, I think if you look at open source software, it was also more this way. So you had this open systems, and then the businesses come.
But I would say that there is a fundamental difference between the software and the hardware part, which is of course the physical part of it, building the prototypes, having the facilities, having the machines available. So I mean, there is a difficulty in starting the open source hardware movement the same way that the software movement came about, is simply because it's not just about people having a computer and a stable internet connection. It's actually about also meeting in the physical realm and having facilities where you can test out and prototype the things that a community is a part of making. And in that, it takes, of course, more time, but it also takes resources in terms of prototype materials and access to machines and stuff like that. So there is these differences that in its own way demands us to think about it differently than the software movement. Of course, it's the same mechanism in terms of the open source, but the way we come about actually fostering this movement to be more mainstream is a somewhat different exercise, I think.
Yeah, of course, it's not exactly the same, but I'm not sure if, because I think the more conservative part is the business part, because this is like this part is very connected to the whole business system, and this has like a very straight idea of how you can get money. So this is just what I wanted to say.
Maybe another point, like we were working on the Pocket Science Lab, and there was also producing their regular things, and there's a lot of like creative solutioning happening in searching for other components and so on. So it's also interesting to me how like yeah, of course, these production the things that one knows about production, how volatile they are somehow, because like if you simply have like double the prices in the parts or something, then suddenly the devices become so expensive that no one is still willing to buy them and so on. So it's interesting how, yeah, there are effects from these things also. Can anyone share like maybe like production and development stories or something, and what's working well and what's maybe difficult or something like?
So I think there are almost no production stories. One big exception for me is PRUSA. They are successful, they are open source, and they show, for me, they show the way we could go. But they are also very professional, and I agree that we cannot be so wasteful in open source hardware development as we are in open source software development. Because if you look on open source software, we have also the situation that there are thousands of so-called open source software projects on GitHub or somewhere. But most of them are also not very interesting because they are not good documented, and it's also in open source software that there are only few professional projects which are successful and which have a specific maturity. So maybe we should concentrate on prototyping and design in the first step, and maybe that would be also a possibility to outsource this stuff for big companies, because we have the advantage that we are more flexible. So maybe that could be a step, because make a product is much more than some prototype.
I'm glad you brought up the example of the PRUSA. In fact, I just bought one. And, you know, they really have a fabulous business model. I mean, you can buy a kit and they have it put in a box. And I ordered it from, what is it, the Czech Republic, and I had it in 4 days for $800. Okay, and they have that thing kind of packaged so that if it's less than $800, we don't pay any customs duty. And of course, PRUSA also has a very sophisticated slicer. You know, one of the, you know, that like Cura, but actually it has some advantages in some areas. So yeah, that's really a great success story of both open source hardware and software. If they could all be that fortunate. But anyway, that's just my comment.
Yeah, it was also really like I did workshops last year, like online, and we were building together like printers. And I was also really impressed by the quality of like the building instructions. And they're not perfect or something, but it really like I was really impressed that you can have like a kit and you have like some instructions, and then in the end you have like a working super precise machine. Like that's actually really a good thing to reach. I wonder if this like kit approach is something that attracts also more people. There's like this Mint Reform laptop from like a company in Berlin, and it's like an open source laptop where also many people like buy it as a kit because they enjoy building it themselves and putting it together themselves. So maybe this is also like some section of people that, yeah, like tinkering and like building and so on. So put this in the document also, like the kit approach basically. Another big point, maybe there's also some ideas on that. Like personally, I think it's super great if one has like open source software to build open source hardware, because it's really difficult to like, and I think it's a difficult topic because like, of course, one is familiar with specific tools and it's very difficult to change that and so on. But I think it would be amazing if in school, in university, in colleges, one would actually be taught the approaches more than one specific software package, and have like access to tools. Because if you share your designs and you can just like download the software and use it, and you know it's open and it's available, then you have like a potentially much bigger base of people that could contribute to your project and so on. So maybe there are some thoughts on that by other people too.
Well, of course, the FabLab was always big on using Ubuntu. I mean, when I started in the FabLab, we were at version 8. Okay, so they've obviously grown, but it's very much an evolving thing. And I guess the one comment I'd have about Ubuntu, although it's very powerful and very flexible, it does require a lot of effort on the part of the user to become proficient with it. And I think as a practical matter, a lot of people, they just, you know, they go Windows or they go Mac, and then there's a network that supports that. Although I found, you know, many of the open source projects now, they do also have ways to get things to work in Windows or on the Mac, you know, whereas 10 years ago, if you had some kind of open source thing, often it seemed to work just in Ubuntu best, or some kind of Linux thing. So I think the users of Linux is probably pretty small compared to, you know, at least on the personal computer level. I think most people are using the Windows or the Mac. But if they can be encouraged to use the open source software, I think you find a lot of smaller projects, you know, that are kind of in the spirit of what you're talking about. So I suppose if you can encourage people to do like what they're doing in the Fab Lab, that would be a start.
There's a lot of people from like software development that I'm in touch with. They often use Linux, but most people that design things and so on, like designers, are really big on Mac in general, and it's often like somehow like in Linux it's easier to just follow the instructions to make something work, and I think on Mac, for example, you have to like jump through a few hoops in order to actually get it working and so on, and yeah. But there are also like great examples of like Libre graphics clubs and so on. And like, I don't know, like in Europe, there's some history of like designers opting to just use open source software. There's like a team in Brussels, open source publishing. And so maybe it's what one needs to make in order, because there's a lot of like steps always to get there. Whereas with other examples, like, I don't know, like Arduino and processing and so on, they're like these certain softwares that are just like the established standards in their fields. And people use them no matter what, basically. So maybe that's kind of one. There are a lot of like KiCad design space.
Yeah, I think I just downloaded KiCad yesterday after listening to a couple of presentations. But two other really excellent open source projects would be like Inkscape, which I learned in the Fab Lab, and I've been using it for the last decade. I mean, it's just a fabulous program, and to a more limited extent, I'll use GIMP to do things that maybe Inkscape won't do. And both of those, of course, have Windows implementations. But again, I mean, there are some great success stories out there, and I'm sure there will be more will be coming.
I would like to hook on a comment at the beginning. I think we are missing a repository. There are a lot of very interesting projects, and unfortunately, a lot of these projects don't know what already exists. Like in the very interesting documentation workshop before, they talked a lot about the laser cutter project, and they spent very much time into the development. And I know of another laser cutter project, and they spent years in the development. But the problem is you don't know, you just find these projects by accident. So we would really need a repository, and we would need much more exchange between the projects.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you definitely need more of a community of users. I'd say in the interest of full disclosure, I know recently I've become a user of Fusion 360, which is not open source, but we have a community of users. We have a Facebook group. We've got a 40-year-old fellow who's a real guru on it, and I'd say most of the students in the class are 50, 60, 70. We meet once a week, and we try to figure out how to use the program. Now, of course, the program is updated frequently since now it's a cloud-based implementation. But what I guess the comment I'd have on that is what you can do in some of these programs is just, you know, mind-boggling compared to what you could do even a decade ago. And it's not that they're getting necessarily any easier to use, but they are certainly getting very sophisticated, and with not too much effort, you can produce some pretty remarkable results. Whereas in the open source ecosystem, at least on the software side, usually you were getting using a program here and then feeding that into another program and then into another program to finally output something, say, on a 3D printer. But anyway, that's part of the competition.
Yeah, sometimes like just through attending like quite some developer meetings and so on, it's also that this other perspective is sometimes missing. Like when you're like developing solutions and so on, of course you think in the way you think yourself. So you know already have a lot of like knowledge before how to install something, what tricks to do and so on. And maybe it would be one way to invite more this user perspective and actually like see how one can make things, yeah, easier and nicer to use and more fun to use instead of, yeah, I don't know, like sometimes there's also this educational aspect of being like, oh, it's actually good if everyone like knows how to jump through these hoops or something. And like, so it's, yeah, it's maybe a tricky question how to make open source software in that case also more accessible. And documentation wise, I'm wondering also what the main benefits are or something, because of course documentation takes a lot of time and you're like sharing all this knowledge that you created. I think it's mainly useful if you can invite other people to actually build on it and like develop together with you and so on, and that the documentation also has like a purpose in itself and not just like fulfilling some requirements of openness or something. Because yeah, I think that's maybe another not so easy thing to solve. And also in like a lot of like, for example, in this Caribous project, we did a lot of like things for assisting people with certain disabilities and so on. And it's, if you just have like a limited time frame, like then documentation is not the main thing. Like at first you want to like create a good solution or something, and maybe you document a bit when someone like reminds you again and again of documenting, but it's very, yeah, it's kind of like it takes away from the time that you have to improve your solutions and so on. So I think that's another, like documentation is super core important, but it's also not easy to solve, and I don't see like the easy pathway there yet in order to solve that. Yes, here's another comment also that like community management of sorts in these open source hardware projects can be very time consuming and so on, and also probably difficult to get people to like to the point that they know enough about the project that they can actively contribute or something, because there's a lot of knowledge that you often need to have in order to know what's happening and how it's happening and what it's good for and why certain decisions are made.
Well, what are some of the ideas for open source projects going forward? I mean, did you want to open source some an Oculus? I understand you can buy one of those for $300, so I don't know if that's the right thing, but I mean, what's the road ahead? I mean, I guess that might be a question that I have. Of course, at this conference, we've had the opportunity to see what the road ahead might be, from some of the presenters, but just what is the open source community trying to accomplish? I mean, I gave the example. I mean, here they're talking more about right to repair and trying to open up, some of the information regarding projects, so repair shops can repair it. But in terms of generation of open source projects, does anyone have any ideas to what the road ahead might be?
Yeah, I think some what I really like is when people are excited, and I'm also like it's nice that there are quite a few people here, so there is interest in the topic, and I think it's really good also to have like smaller starting projects, because like projects easily grow very big, and it's really nice to go through the basic steps of like for example with electronics, how to build something, and then how to like publish it, and just getting something to work. I think this is a big thing like in the educational sector, and also putting a focus on it there. And for like the example of Sarah with the City Lab, like introducing newbies right away to these concepts and helping them, because in the beginning the learning curve is always steep, regardless of which software you use. So if you already start with something that you can build on afterwards, maybe this is a good approach.
Well, I remember when I took the Fab Academy 10 years ago, Neil suggested that maybe we were 20 years away from a Star Trek type replicator, and that was kind of the goal. Now, of course, 10 years have passed. We're not there yet, but I guess I was just trying to think of, what is the, but we may not be going after a Star Trek replicator anymore. We've actually achieved quite a bit of it with 3D printers and with some of the other tools out there. So I'm just wondering what's new, what's the goal? But I mean, you've already addressed that to some extent. It sounds like you're saying that the goal is learning and teaching people how to do some of this, if I'm paraphrasing you correctly. But I guess I'm wondering about the how. I mean, people said maybe we should have a repository for some of these open source projects and ideas, but it would seem we need to get a community of users together and get a little bit more buzz going with this particular project.
Yeah, I also wonder when it's a big advantage, like for example, in the mobile phone space, I think many people are upset with, like, don't want to use neither Apple nor Google anymore somehow, and would be really happy to have like a working alternative. So, and there are some things like PinePhone and so on, but it's still kind of more for nerds than for like, yeah, having a good telephone audio quality and being able to still use your messenger in the way you're used to, and so on.
There's the Fairphone.
So like maybe also like modular concepts in general. I think it's really useful to be able to connect other things. So like in the musical space, for example, if you have like music devices and you have like open things where others can build new components, and you grow this ecosystem, maybe we can find more things where it's actually useful that you don't have this locked in product approach, but actually, like for example with the Raspberry Pi compute module or something, like there are KiCad files now where you can simply modify existing things in order to make your own connector and your own module and so on. And I think probably it doesn't make sense to always be like, okay, like, is this open source on a chip level or something? Probably one always needs some abstraction at the moment, but I think it's already really helpful if someone did all this connector work already, and I can like just plug in like a functionality that I like, and this might be also then something that someone else wants to use and so on. So like maybe getting more into this mode of creating something that someone else can pick up, and where I feel like, okay, like this is maybe something that I then also want to plug into my musical construction system or something. And maybe this standardization aspect, as Leopold, you were mentioning architecture and so on. I think it's also really helpful if one has this a lot already, like in these sensor spaces and so on, and the companies that make good money with providing like boards for makers and so on, that a lot of these things are like standardized in a way that one can actually knows how to connect the things and build on modular systems. So maybe modularity and standardization is one way to go forward.
Yeah, I think again, Leopold had a great example there with the Fairphone, because I mean, that's designed so that you don't have to be a techie to put in the battery. You take off the cover and you put a new battery in, or you can do a lot of upgrades yourself. But I guess a lot of that starts at the design level. It was designed to be repairable and fixable, whereas a lot of things like my refrigerator broke a couple of years ago when it was almost impossible to find the parts and then to get at them. Okay, which is annoying. I think that's part of the reason we have a right to repair movement in this country, just because we would like, you know, sometimes the people who build them don't have to fix them, and so they don't get their hands dirty when they have to do so. But anyway, yeah, the Fairphone's a great example also.
I think this repair example is an interesting one, because what we are seeing now is that it's changing, that we have like we have always modules, you know, so the modules are not itself open source. We have like a very simple way to combine modules of systems. And for me, it's a big question if this is, yeah, open hardware. I think it's not. So it's just like replacing broken modules. So especially if it comes to mobile phones or something like this. And I think if we are not aware of this, then we will not have open hardware and all this repair, right to repair stuff, because I think the normal way will be that we will have like more modular systems which make it easy to exchange modules.
I also wonder, just from like the FabLab makerspace perspective, like maybe we can collect some things. What would you need to advertise more for open source hardware, or like if you think, okay, like in my space, like how could I encourage people to think in this direction, to do something in this direction? What would I need? Like what would be great if there were resources on?
I think a big problem is that a lot of people in our space too create stuff like in their free time. So and for them it's fun, and if they want to focus, then they need to get out of their jobs. So I think it's a very fast question of money. Or if they have like a very good team which which help them to document their stuff, because at the end this is also always a big problem. So I think it's not the thing that they get money for documenting. I think it's always more like having a person who really helps them documenting stuff, and this could be yeah, something which makes it
And
interesting.
it's a good point also about people's time. And one of the things that we've been working on here in Denmark is also to find new incentive models for our members and makers. Not just thinking in financial incentives, but also finding out what is it that drives the sort of engagement within the community. Is it the actual product development? Is it the documentation? Is it something else? Because that's also a question of maintaining a community and not just sort of using the resources for the makerspace's benefit or for a company's benefit. So really working on sort of the incentives that we present to our community.
Yeah, this is a very important one. If I look at our lab, then it's often a problem that the person is not willing to work on his own on something. He's like very interested in working together with other people. And this is why the people are in these kind of labs and in our lab. So and if we have those kind of teams, then it's much more active, and the people are more willing to work also for a longer time on projects. Especially if you have all these different kind of roles. The person maybe who is more documenting, other one who is like more into electronics and so on.
Yeah, and this also has to do with the primary uses of the different makerspaces, because in Denmark we of course have a lot of makerspaces with the sort of typical users, makers with a full-time job on the side and spending the weekends and afternoons in the space. But what the space that we have are mostly for physical entrepreneurs, so professionals either with an established business and products, but it can also be sort of startups, physical startups, stuff like that. But it has also a relevance into this, because when we then think of engagement in terms of our members, it's also about looking at them as professionals and thereby finding incentives that match those professional levels. But of course, those incentives will differ depending on the community, the users, the space itself, the country, the culture, and so forth. So yeah, also an interesting question, I think.
Yeah, I think what works often really nice, but like we mainly did this in these academies with like that I mentioned earlier in this Carables context. But I think it's really great to like have a team of people where someone wants to use it, someone wants to find solutions and so on, and it's really helpful to already start in that way and not just be like, okay, like I start developing something for some while and then I talk to someone who might use it and so on, and it's very cumbersome. And ideally you have like all these different competencies in a team right in the beginning. Maybe in point to what you said, Malte, about like professionals and so on, like from my experience, on the one hand there's this like, yeah, what do I make my money with? But then there are also like a lot of people that have their day jobs and they are super skilled and they're super interested in what they do there. But then on the other hand, they actually like they want to do something else and they want to like also use their skills in a different setting. So I think it's also great sometimes that you have like developers and people in these projects that are super skilled and they just look for something where they can, yeah, do other things or create something that they perceive as more meaningful or also meaningful or something in their spare time, and learn something new and have this in a different context. So So I think that's also super great that that there are often people that you probably wouldn't be able to hire for that job because they do something else normally, or they're like would be far too expensive or something. But if it's a good project and it makes sense, then people are actually encouraged to take part and contribute and make something and see it evolve and so on.
Of course, and it's not to make the distinction between sort of skilled people and not skilled people. It's just about the how we build the incentive structures in terms of people having a day job or it being their day job. So yeah.
Yeah, and especially in order to keep something going, because like there are a lot of like projects that had great potential or something, and then people like stop at some point because they feel like, okay, like I've been doing this for quite some while. I don't know, I have kids now, or like I want to do something else, or like so how do you and if it's your day job and you actually make enough money to sustain yourself and so on, then makes far more sense also to like think more strategically and how can you grow this and so on. So all these like aspects of I don't know, like gaining market share or something, but actually having something that many people are using is also depending often on that people feel like, okay, like actually if this works out, maybe I'm still doing this in 5 years, or it's still continuing and something evolves from it and so on. So we would have 20 more minutes, roughly. Do we want to use them? How do we want to use them?
At the beginning, you said you're thinking about an alliance. So what are the plans?
Yes, would be nice to maybe also collect some contact details or something in order to continue on that. And for me, it's also really like one core question is like, okay, like what does this look like? Does one have like some kind of manifesto, charter, something where one says, yeah, we're like interested in supporting open source hardware and we want to do this, if this is more about like having like educational material about resources that one can use and or like best practice examples, or it's kind of like the question, what are the core elements that would help? Because like recently I went to like a university and was like very I don't know, like economy computer science department or something, but they had like, and was very, very traditional everything, but then they had this like right to repair poster hanging there on the pinboard, and I thought, yeah, that's nice, like that this somehow even this poster works well in a way that it reaches into different areas and so on. Maybe that's something that could be similar, and like we're like at the moment the spaces that work in this OpenX project, and we would like to expand this somehow, but also I think we need feedback in order to know, okay, like what would be useful for each one of you in your individual space, like what could be something that's helpful for you in order to, I don't know, like help this label of like open source hardware and the idea behind it and the things connected to it.
Maybe we can learn from the Free Software Foundation. Maybe we need an Open Hardware Foundation. And as said, somebody said it before, I think software and hardware are melting together more and more. There is almost no intelligent hardware without any software.
Yeah, there's maybe a little anecdote. Like I went here in Berlin with a underground railroad, and there was like advertisement for pupils to engage in FPGA development or something starting from 8th grade, and I'm very curious, like also like how, on the one hand, how do they teach it, because like I find it super complicated, and like I attended some things, but I still find it very difficult to wrap my head around it. But at the same time they're reaching out to like eighth graders and encouraging them to do it, so probably they have good material of teaching the fundamentals at least. But I think that's a super interesting part too, because it's like simulated hardware on your chip, and maybe this could be probably not the main thing because it's still niche, but I think it's a nice gapping element, basically, like programmable hardware that does whatever you want. And there you also have like these modules that make a lot of sense, because if someone designed a certain part, then you can actually just copy it and paste it like in the like with software, but then you have like hardware.
But it would be nice. I mean, those interested, if you could maybe leave your contact information in the chat or in the link provided by Daniel earlier, so we can continue the talk and also the purpose of the Alliance afterwards. Not that it's there's not anything set in stone right now about the Alliance and how to move forward, but it could be a good foundation for the next discussions.
Yeah, I would be interested in like figuring out, maybe there's like this manifesto kind of thing. I don't know if it's this, because there's this Open Source Hardware Association that need to be like kind of something which adds to this. But yeah, I would be interested in working on this. And yeah, thank you for your workshop.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all for attending. And yeah, if anyone has like final words and thoughts, please share.
Yeah, you know, I do kind of have the sense that you know, this right to repair movement is something that's capturing the imagination of a lot of people, and that might be something that this group wants to capitalize on, for lack of a better word. Because, you know, using the example of a toaster that was given earlier, you mentioned that Thuringia, they might give people a bonus if they have their toaster fixed, as opposed to buying a new one. But of course, as Leopold has said, you know, almost everything now has some kind of microchip associated with it. So it's not just a toaster with heating elements, it's a toaster with heating elements and a microchip somewhere. And of course, that requires some knowledge to repair. So presumably the open source hardware movement would be adding a certain amount of expertise, you know, to making people aware of that aspect of repair, and maybe even providing, you know, an environment where people could go to learn a little bit more about you know, how the newer appliances work, if, or whatever it is, you know. But
yeah, it's also like I took some classes also in the US once, and like they're like this locking customers in is also like something that's still being taught basically as a strategy for having a good business. So basically taking open stuff and making it part of your ecosystem that doesn't have any connections to the outside is like, for a lot of companies, like a viable way of doing it. So maybe like actively being like, yeah, trying to having that as something that stands out. I think this could be a good way. Yeah, I can also share my email here. So if you want to follow up in any way, or you have like ideas afterwards, how to maybe continue, what you would need, and so on, then please write me an email.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for participating. Great discussions. Yeah, have fun.